Good to go. Okay, Parshas Chayei. So first I'm going to go a little bit into the Parsha, then we're going to go into some of the more unusual elements that the Oter Palos HaTorah brings down. The first thing it says over here is, again, jumping around in the Parsha, the Radak, Rabbeinu David Kimchi, he says something interesting. He brings down from the Alshich HaKodesh. The Alshich says that when Rivka saw Yitzchak for the first time, she took a veil and she covered herself. That's where we have the minhag at a wedding, that the Chatan covers the bride with a veil. So the Alshich says two people put on a veil. Rivka was one. Who was the other person who in the Torah it says that she was wearing a veil? The other one was Tamar. By Yehuda, Tamar and Yehuda. And the Alshich says, she was hiding herself. The Alshich says both ladies had twin boys. And he brings down the Alshich that if a lady is having difficulty having children, she should practice tzniut. The reward for tzniut is that you'll be zoche, you'll have children, and even twin boys. That's what the Alshich HaKodesh writes. So that's the first thing that I found very interesting. Reb Simcha Sheps, who was one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Torah Vadas, it talks about when they bring down the ages of the people, it says Sarah was 100, she was 20, she was 7, and Rashi brings down that at 100 she was like 20, and 20 she was like 7. They have different, different interpretations. So Reb Simcha Sheps says as follows. He says it's interesting. Let's say an average person lives to be 70 years old. So he says the first 20 years of their life, children, the first 20 years, teenagers, the most important thing to them is what their friends are thinking. They want to be popular. Peer pressure, the most important thing. I have a situation now with a child who's in a school where the most popular kid in the class doesn't like him, and therefore he's turning everybody in the class against him. And the parents are so upset they want to take the child out of the school, and we're trying to see what we can work out. It's amazing. It makes no difference who the teachers, it makes no difference the program, it makes no difference the school. If a child has someone in the class who doesn't like him or like her, they can turn the entire class. The first 20 years of your life, what's the most important thing? You're worried what the other person is thinking. Then Rabbi Shep says, the next 20 years of your life, you don't care what the other person thinks. He said when a person turns 20 or 21, and you say to a child, what is everybody else going to say? I don't care, I'm my own person, I can do what I want. For 20 years, I only cared what the other person says. The next 20 years, you don't even care at all what the other person says. Just the opposite. And then he says, the third 20 years, when a person turns 50 or 60, he realizes that it's not important what the other people think, and nobody cares what you think. Your whole perspective of life is totally different now. Now it makes no difference what you think, what they think. You realize you're not all that important. Nobody really cares what you think and who you are. You go through life a certain amount of anonymity. So he says it's very interesting how our attitudes change and how our whole life we're chasing something that's not real. I found that to be very, very interesting. Rabbi Yoshev brings down a Gemara, very interesting Gemara. He says when they, I think it stopped. No, you have a phone call coming in. Rabbi Yoshev says, it's interesting with Avram negotiating with Ephron, with the Bnei Chetz. His first reaction was, oh, you're such a chosh of a person, you're so important. Wherever you want to bury your person, you can bury. As they begin negotiating and talking, all of a sudden, it's 400 shekel over the socher. It's $1 million. The property went up to $1 million. So Rabbi Yoshev brings down a famous Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says as follows: when an ignorant person, an Am Ha'aretz, meets a Torah scholar, a Talmud Chacham, for the first time, he looks at him like he's gold, like he's special. After they talk for a little while, he becomes like silver. And then after he contributes to the shul or pays towards his salary, he becomes like an earthenware ladle that if it becomes broken, he throws it out and gets a new one. He says it's amazing how quickly relationships deteriorate. How a person, when you begin to a relationship, the person is like gold to you, and then eventually the person just deteriorates and things become worse and worse and worse. It's very interesting to see how that's done. The Rabbi Akiva, famous Gemara Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was giving a shir, and you wouldn't believe what was happening. People were falling asleep in the shir. Could you imagine that? People were falling asleep in Rabbi Akiva's shir. It happens. Not just here. It even happened to the great Rabbi Akiva. Could you believe it? So Rabbi Akiva wanted to get everybody awake. So all of a sudden, in the middle of the shir, he says, why do you think Esther ruled 127 countries? He said, why? He says, because Sarah lived 127 years. What is the connection? Yeah. So the Chidushei Harim says that every year that Sarah lived, she accomplished so much, and she had such chusim, such reward, that Hashem said, I'm going to pay you back, Sarah Imenu, that you're going to have a great-great-granddaughter called Esther, who for every year is going to rule another country. Not another city. A country that could have 100 cities in it. 127 years you lived, 127 countries. So the Osterver Rebbe and different people see how important it is, to live every year and make the most of it. There was a chief rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, who I happen to know. When I was, on the Bet Din in Tel Aviv, we had cases that had to be reviewed. All our cases. Once a week or once a month, the chief rabbis had to review our cases. In my day, there were two chief rabbis, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi. The Ashkenazi chief rabbi was Rabbi Shlomo Goren. And the Sephardi chief rabbi was Rabbi Vadri Yosef. Now, even though Rabbi Goren lived right near the Bet Din in Tel Aviv, but there was a lot of controversy surrounding Rabbi Goren, so all our cases was reviewed by Rabbi Vadri Yosef. Or most of the cases were. Every Bet Din had a Sephardi Dayan and two Ashkenazi Dayanim. Sometimes it was reversed, two Sephardi, one Ashkenazi. But Rabbi Vadri Yosef was the one who reviewed my cases in many cases, in many situations. So, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, and he was brilliant. Just to give you an idea of how brilliant he was, there was a case where, I think I've told you this before, there was a case that in near Haifa area, there was a accident where a particular person lost their thumb. Their thumb was cut off in an accident. So they called for a medevac helicopter, and they were going to fly the person with the thumb to a hospital near Haifa, probably Tel HaShomer, wherever it was, and they were going to attach the thumb back. No problem. Everything was going like clockwork. The helicopter arrived, and the pilot got out, and they loaded the guy in, and then they started to bring the thumb. The pilot says, I'm sorry, I can't take the thumb. They said, what are you talking about? We need to take the thumb. We want to attach the thumb.
What's the point?
He said, what's taking the guy without the thumb? He says, I'm a Kohen.
Wow.
And a thumb that's detached, which has a bone in it, is tamei.
Dead body.
It's a dead body. So I can't take the thumb. I'll take the guy, but you got to send the thumb some other way.
He's Kohen. And
He's a Kohen.
it took this kind of job. Yes.
I remember I had a din Torah once, where, what was the din Torah about? The synagogue was taking the rabbi to a din Torah, because they hired the rabbi, and a few weeks later, one of the members, very important member, died. And when they asked the rabbi to officiate at the funeral, he says, I'd like to, but I'm a Kohen. And they didn't know he was a Kohen. So they claim, we have older people in our community. We hired a rabbi to service us. He says, I will service you. I'll be at every marriage. I'll do britim. I'll do everything. I'll only do happy things. I won't be able to do funerals. I'm not a funeral rabbi.
He's not touching the body, not going.
But he can't be in the same room. He can't be in the same room with a dead body.
But it's not important to put the body in the room. They can put body.
You're right, but in this place they brought the body into the synagogue for
They could bring it out.
So
They
that
don't.
was
They don't bring body to synagogue.
but sometimes they do if the man is an important person of the community. So they had a whole din Torah whether they could break the contract or not because he was a Kohen. In the end, they could not break the contract. They just made the contract for 1 year and they had to choose whether they liked him and not to keep him. In the end, I think they kept him. But that was the case. So they called Reb Mordechai Eliyahu what to do. So Reb Mordechai Eliyahu on the spot says to the pilot, you can take the person and the thumb. So he said, Rebbe, how can I take the thumb? It's Tamei. He said, it's a Gemara in Masechet Nida. The Gemara asked a question by Eliyahu Hanavi, how could he bring the child back to life? Eliyahu Hanavi was what? A Kohen. How could he put his hand on a dead body?
Make it live.
Make it alive again. So the Gemara answers that once the body came back alive, it means it was never dead. If it was never dead, I'm not Tamei. So he says, if we attach the thumb back on the finger,
It's gonna be normal.
it was normal. It was never a dead body. So therefore you're not Tamei.
So he cannot stay with the dead body in the same room, right?
Right. But once they
So
attach it back on, Lemafreya comes out that it was never
In
dead.
the trunk. So it's a separate room.
If he had that on his helicopter. He didn't have that on his helicopter. He
They
wasn't
don't
going to
have the
hang it
luggage.
outside.
They don't have the luggage room.
No.
On a helicopter? No, this didn't come with luggage. So that was his answer. So Reb Mordechai Eliyahu once said something very interesting. He said that in Parshas Vayigash, Paro asked Yaakov, how old are you? So he says, I'm 130 years old. In Parshas Vayechi, it says that Yaakov lived 17 years in Mitzrayim. Yaakov is 147. So Reb Mordechai Eliyahu, the chief rabbi, asked, last week he's 130. Now he's 17 years older. I can do the math and do it to 147. I don't need the Torah to tell me he's 147. The Torah is not a math book. So why does the Torah tell me, and Yaakov was 147 years old? He says, because most people who live 100, how old are they in Shammai? Well, first of all, half their life, they're sleeping or eating. And half their life, they're playing, and they're kids. You come up to Shamayim, you think you're 100, you're only 15 years old. Because that's all you really did, mitzvahs, 15 years. So it says, the Torah is telling you that Yaakov Avinu was 147. That means when he came up to Shamayim, every minute was so special, he never wasted a second. So he was 147 in this world, but even in Shamayim, he was also 147.
Oh.
So it tells you how important he was. They bring down a story that the Chofetz Chaim never had shoelaces in his shoes because it took 30 seconds to tie his shoelaces. And he didn't want to waste 30 seconds tying his shoelaces. Right?
Isn't a mitzvah?
So he says, maybe it's a mitzvah, maybe it's not. He says he didn't waste any time. He wanted to do as much as he could to learn. So that's what he said. He never wasted a time. Parshas Chayei is a parsha we always read for a Chatan Kala. I don't know, they have a minhag. They used to, in the olden days, they had a minhag that whenever they had a Shabbat Chatan, they would bring out the Sefer Torah, they would read from Parashat Chayei. Because it's all about Shidduchim, it's all about relationships. So they bring down a story with Rabbi Aaron Kotler, that Rabbi Aaron Kotler talks about that he would often tell people who would ask him about boys in his yeshiva, interesting comment. They bring down, they say this from the Slabodka Rosh Yeshiva as well. He says that a father once came to the Rosh Yeshiva and says, I want the best learner in the world. I want the best boy that learns Torah. He says, what do you want the best boy that learns Torah for? He says, because I have my daughter. I want my daughter to marry a Talmud Chacham who's going to be a Rosh Yeshiva. So she says, I want the name of the best boy. So she says, the best boy is that boy, Moshe Rabinowitz. He says, wow, he's the best boy, he's the best boy. Do you think he's a good husband? He's a good shidduch for my daughter? He says, well, it depends. If you're looking for a chavrusa for your daughter, he's best. If you're looking for a husband, I wouldn't take him.
Right.
You understand? When you ask for the best learner, that means what are you asking for? You're asking for a boy who wants to learn 24/7. Is your daughter a chavrusa? You want a husband. So you should be asking, what kind of midos does he have? Is he generous? Is he kind? Is he thoughtful? There are questions you ask for a shidduch that are appropriate questions. To ask whether he sits and learns Torah 24/7 is a great question if you're learning in the yeshiva. But if you're trying to find a husband, it's not necessarily the best question. They talk about Rav Moshe Feinstein, and many stories. Again, they asked his children, Rav David Feinstein, Rav Reuven Feinstein, some story about Rav Moshe. So he says that when we were kids, we used to play hopscotch. You know what hopscotch is? It's a game where on the sidewalk you make squares and you jump from different squares and you have to. It's a game. He says when my father would come home from the yeshiva, and he was always busy, and we were playing this game with my friends, he always waited until we finished the game, and then he would walk. He never walked during the game, and therefore we had to stop the game. That means here are kids talking about their father. Their father is the Gadol Hador. Their father finished Shas 1,000 times. Their father knew every single posek. But what do they remember about him? That he had tremendous sensitivity to children playing. That means he understood children playing. They bring down a story with Rav Pam, a very famous story with Rav Pam. That Rav Pam was once giving a test in one of his classes, and there was a boy that was cheating. He was cheating on the test. So Rav Pam went over to the boy, and of course now the boy got scared. Rav Pam is there. Rav Pam went over to the boy, and he whispered in the boy's ear, he says, "You don't have to cheat. If you need help, ask me, I'll help you." That means Rav Pam understood that some kids need help. And for a kid to cheat, that's not a good thing. And to punish a kid is not a good thing. Rav Pam didn't put much value on tests. If you're a teacher, if you're a good teacher, you know where your students are holding even without giving them a test. You don't need a test to tell you whether the student knows his stuff or not. And people get nervous. So Rav Pam had a certain sensitivity. Now, there's a Rosh Hashiva in Ner Yisrael. His name is Rabbi Aaron Feldman. I know him very well, not that much from Ner Yisrael, but I was together with him in Israel for many years, and I got to become friendly with him. He wrote a book on Sholem Bayit, on marriage. The name of the book is based on a Gemara in Brachos. It's called The River, the Kettle, and the Bird. Now that's an unusual name for a book on Sholem Bayit. It's based on a Gemara I told you in Brachos. Let me tell you what the Gemara says. The Gemara says there are 3 different types of relationships. The first relationship is a river. Now, in the United States, years ago, let's say the Mississippi River. Have you ever heard of the Mississippi River?
Mississippi.
Mississippi, Mississippi. It's a large river. And along the river, there were many cities. Now, the cities had no connection with each other. Some were in different states. But they had a common need, the river. Boats would travel up the river. It would stop in different cities. It would bring products from one city to the next. That means the river connected 2 cities. The 2 cities themselves had very little in common, but they had a common need to make sure the river was maintained. He says some marriages are like a river. The 2, husband and wife, somehow just don't connect. They don't seem to interact enough. But they have common needs. The husband can't cook and do laundry, so he needs the wife to do that. The wife wants to stay home for the children. She needs the husband to go and earn a living. So they live in the same house, and they interact because they have common needs. But it's what they have in common is the needs. The floor, the kitchen, the children. They don't have any connection between the 2 of them. That's the river. The next thing is the kettle. Now the kettle is a little bit more complicated because the kettle is used to cook, to heat up hot water. If you don't have the kettle and you put the water on the fire, the water will put out the fire. And if the fire is very strong, it'll evaporate the water. So now there has to be a relationship between the fire and the water, and the relationship of the fire and the water is accomplished through the kettle. Each force can't work on its own, but together they have some shared goals. So therefore, there is a bond, but it's a limited bond. It's a bond that exists only as the need arises for the shared goals. But if you don't have the shared goals, and that's how come marriages, after many years, sometimes 30 or 40 years, they lose interest because they've lost their shared interest. The third level, he says, is a bird. He says a bird is an unusual animal. It flies, but when it gets tired, it lands on the ground. But when it lands on the ground, it's subject to attack from other animals who would like to eat the bird, so it has to fly again. So the bird lives in two worlds, the air and the earth. And yet, it's still one bird. So it's like two types of animals. It can walk like an animal, but it can fly like a bird. But it's fused into one. It's one being. He says a successful marriage are people who are two totally different people. One's male, one's female. They think different, they act different, they view life differently. But together, they become one. That means they're not two separate people that coexist in the house. They're one entity, they're one body, they're one person. And that person cannot exist on its own. They coexist. They exist as one. That is the symbol, the Gemara says, of a bird. And that is the highest level of a marriage, because that is a marriage which has the greatest chance of success when both parties recognize that they cannot exist without the other. You know, sometimes you have this. I have seen that sometimes when it happens more by men than by women, that when the wife passes away, very often you see that 2 months later the husband dies.
Yeah.
You know, it happens. You know, because he's lost. You know, he lost his wife. And in a healthy marriage, in a healthy relationship, he lost. He lost his wife, so therefore, you know, you see right away there's something missing. It's interesting that when Avram looked for a wife for Yitzchak, he didn't look for a wife exactly like Yitzchak. Yitzchak was a tough person, went through a lot. He was like his mother. Avram looked for a wife that was more like him. Chesed. So you say, well, you know, Avram, you're trying to give instructions to find a wife that is a mirror of you. Why not look for a wife that's more like your son? But we know that he understood that he didn't need another tough person. Two tough people in the family
You can't do it.
doesn't work.
Yes.
You know,
Somebody gotta be
right. You need a give and take. You need a balance.
flexibility.
A little bit of flexibility. So you see from Parshas Chayei a little bit the wisdom of Avraham Avinu when he gives instructions to Eliezer. We're going to go through that in a moment, a little bit more of what happened there, but that's going to come a little bit later. But we see a little bit more the chokhmah that went into that particular shidduch as to what to look for. Now, we know that Avraham Avinu sent Eliezer back to his family. Now, it's interesting because his family wasn't great people. Besuel was there, which we're going to learn about. Lavan was there. You know, Lavan was a thief, a cheat, a liar. You know, it wasn't a family that you should necessarily be proud about. Mm-hmm. But there was something that the family had. They seemed to have some very wonderful midot. Because Rivka was a very kind person, and Rachel and Leah were very kind people. So we see, in spite of the fact that his family worshipped idols, Lavan was a big idol worshiper, as we know, and they didn't do many mitzvahs, but they had a certain midah that was very, very good. And Avram looked for the midos. Mm-hmm. He didn't look to see what was around him, he looked for a particular midah. It's interesting, we talked about this last week, how Avram spent so much time to save Lot. What did Lot contribute? He had a relationship with his daughter that gave birth to Moab. Why was Moab necessary? Because Moab gave birth to Ruth. And Ruth was necessary because Mashiach comes from Ruth. So we see that here from the outside, even though Klal Yisrael was in existence and there was the 12 Shvatim and they had wonderful avos and imahos, there was still an ingredient missing that Mashiach needed from an outside source like Rus HaMoaviyah that had to come through Lot, through a horrible circumstance. So it's not so easy to put together the ingredients necessary for a family. That means shidduchim are very, very difficult. Family relationships are very difficult, as we know. Today, more than ever, it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard, to grow and have a family and to be successful and to have a loving environment. What it does, the ingredients is aseh l'charav, you need some guidance, you need a rav, and a knei l'chachaver, you need some good friends. So for the family to survive, men need some good friends that they can have good positive relationships, and they need guidance. They need someone, if they disagree, well, whatever the rabbi says, we're going to follow. I had a case a few weeks ago with Din Torah where the guy said to me, he's a frum person, he said to me, whatever the rabbis say, I'm not going to follow it. I mean, if the rabbis say that I don't have to pay anything, I'll listen. But if the rabbis say I have to pay this guy, I don't like this guy, I hate this guy so much that even if the rabbi would say I owe him the money, I could never pay him. So I said, if you already know in advance that whatever the rabbi says you're not going to listen to, don't come to the Din Torah. Go to court. Because there, at least, if you get angry at a judge who's not Jewish, so you're angry at a non-Jewish judge. But if you get angry at the rabbi, you're going to get angry at Hashem, the Torah. Before you know it, you're going to hate God, the Torah, everything. It's not worth it, I said. That means, if you can't accept the fact that the Chachamim know what's right, and you do what they say, there are many people who do. Many people who say, even if I'm wrong, if the rabbi says I'm wrong, I can accept that. If my wife says I'm wrong, I can't accept it. But if the rabbi says I'm wrong, I can accept it. There are people like that. Okay. Otze Palos HaTorah. Some very interesting perspectives. The first thing he said was as follows. Under normal conditions, we know that God created, there's a pasuk, Tzur Yelatcha Teshi. Hashem gave people the ability to forget. You know that? When you forget something, and someone says to you, if your husband ever says to you, how could you forget that? The answer is Hashem gave us the ability to forget. We were created that we don't have photographic memories, most of us. When a person passes away, it's very painful. But over time, the pain becomes less and less because we forget. We move on. What is the Gemara asks, what is the average time it takes a person to forget the pain of the loss of a loved one? What is the average time?
12 months.
12 months. That's why Avelut for parents is 12 months. That's why we say Kaddish for 12 months. We say a little bit less. That's why in the first 12 months, some people have the minhag not to say Yizkor on Chagim. I do. During the 12 months, I said Yizkor. Many people do say Yizkor. But after the 12-month period is what it takes.
But Sephardim don't say Yizkor.
Sephardim don't say Yizkor at all.
We don't say Yizkor.
No, we
Okay.
say, but in the holidays.
Only on the holidays. What I'm talking about on the holidays. We say Yizkor on Yom
Pesach.
Kippur,
Pesach.
Pesach, right, 4 times. Shavuot and Shmini Atzeret. Now, he brings down something very interesting. He says that Yitzchak, when he heard about the loss of his mother, it took him 3 years to forget. Because we see that at the Akedah he was 37. And he only gets married to Rivka when he's 40. And it says that after he got married to Rivka, he finally had nechama for the loss of his mother. So he brings down, he says that although the average time is a year, Yitzchak, as an example, did not get over the loss of his mother for 3 years. So I found that to be very interesting. He brings down something else also very interesting. He says Yitzchak was not at the funeral of his mother.
Yeah.
When you look at Parshas Chayei, Avraham does all the negotiations. Yitzchak is not there. So they ask, where was Yitzchak? What? Where was Yitzchak? So some people say yeshiva. He brings down that at the Akedah, he had died. Remember we went through this experience that he had died? That he was mortally wounded, that the Malachim took him to Gan Eden.
Yeah.
And he stayed there for 3 years to heal. It took him 3 years before he could leave Gan Eden to come back. So he brings down that for 3 years he was in Gan Eden. It's also interesting, they talk about how old was Rivka. One opinion says she was 3 years old. One opinion says she was 14. He says, the opinion that says she was 3 years old, let me explain to you that opinion, he says. At the time of the Akedah, Yitzchak got a new neshama. Remember last week we
Yes.
talked about a new neshama?
Yeah.
So in the Shama years, how old was Yitzchak?
1.
3.
3 years.
3 years old.
Oh, yeah.
He says Rivka also got a new neshama at that time. So when they say she was 3, it means her neshama was 3 years old. Physically, she was 14 or she was 20. He says, don't think she was a 3-year-old girl that got married. She was much older, he says. But her neshama was 3 years old.
What means neshama? Why she before doesn't have?
So the answer that they gave last week from the Tana of the Beit Eliyahu, or maybe the Prick of the Rabbi Eliezer, he says that Yitzchak had a feminine neshama, and that's why the first 37 years he never got married. At the Akedah, he died. He came back. He made the bracha Chayei metim in the Shmona Esrei, and the neshama he got now was male. So now he could have children. He could get married, and Rivka had the same switch. So they switched. So they were really, I guess, one neshama that was.
So
Had to be switched back.
She had a male neshama?
I guess that's what it was.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's interesting that they were both, in theory, based on the neshama, only 3 years old. But Yitzchak was 40, and Rivka was somewhere like 14 or 20. So she was a much older person that they give. Now, it's interesting that he brings down an opinion. We don't paskin this way. He brings down an opinion. Let's say, for example, in the days of the Gemara, a man and a woman, they're married. The man goes off to war and doesn't come back. Okay?
She can marry.
Can she remarry? The answer is no. She's called an aguna.
Yeah.
An aguna means a woman whose husband disappeared.
No, disappeared.
Okay, disappeared. We don't know what happened. There's a problem. So she misses him. She cries for him. So then the question comes up, if after a year she goes before the Bet Din and she says to the Bet Din, I'm no longer crying for him, I no longer miss him. It must be a sign that he's dead. Because if he's alive, I would consider to miss him. You know, like Yaakov. When Yosef disappeared, everybody expected Yaakov would cry for a year. How long did Yaakov cry for? 22 years. There was a proof that Yosef was still alive. Because had Yosef been dead, he would have forgotten about him. So they asked the question, maybe we can free all these women who are agunot, because after a year that their husband disappeared, if they don't miss him anymore, it must be that they're dead. But he says, marriage being what it is, most women don't miss their husband after 3 days, let alone after a full year. So he says, we really can't go by that too much. I mean, that won't work. That won't fly anymore. He says that's not enough to make it work. Now, I have a case that's very interesting. I have a case where a particular Bukharian family, where they were married, and they were married a short time. The girl became pregnant. In her 9th month, she disappeared and flew back to Israel and had the baby in Israel. She just disappeared. Husband came home from work one day, and she wasn't home.
Okay.
Her things were gone. She packed her bags. She disappeared. What?
My cousin happened to him.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Lucky
No, he
him.
passed away too.
Lucky him, no?
Okay, maybe, but he passed away or something, he said. So,
Young passed away.
so she disappeared. And then she had the baby in Israel, and she had the birth in Israel, she had the baby's name in Israel, etc., etc., etc. He's here, she's there. She only married him for the green card. There's a whole, it's not that complicated, but it's a complicated case. Anyway, she hired a lawyer here, and the lawyer filed a petition in Supreme Court. All divorce cases go to Supreme Court, where she's asking for child support.
Yes.
$1,000 a month child support. The guy came to me, we tried to work it out, she wouldn't negotiate, so he has an attorney, I found him a lawyer, and the lawyer went to court and said to the judge, if this woman was so quick to pick up herself and move to Israel and had the baby there, and they weren't married for that long, my client has suspicions that the baby is not his. So we want a DNA test. Before you obligate my client to pay $1,000 a month child support, we want to make sure the baby is his. And the judge agreed. The judge ordered a DNA test, and a laboratory in Israel was contacted to take a DNA swab and send it back to
On
America.
whose expenses?
Husband. Or,
Husband expenses, probably.
Yeah, always husband.
Husband expenses.
He respect,
Okay.
request, he pays.
Right.
No, the husband. The father.
Husband.
Sure,
Okay.
Husband.
So I get a phone call Friday. The court got a letter from the wife's attorney from a rabbi in Israel. And no, the letter says that the state of Israel, the Rabbanut, the Bet Din, does not allow DNA testing to figure out who the father is. Because if the father is not the father, then we have to classify the child as a mamzer, and then the child won't be able to get married so easily because this is a Jewish state that follows the Torah, and therefore we don't do any DNA testing by law.
No,
Oh.
problem.
So first of all, I responded as follows. I was asked to make a comment. I said, number one, I know the Rabbanut's position on DNA. They don't accept DNA because evidence has to be 100% and DNA is only 99.9999%. So it's not 100%. So I said, even if the DNA comes back that the father is not the father, the child is only safek mamzer. And there's no classification. The Torah only says mamzer vade, no safek mamzer. So that rabbi's opinion is void, is not relevant. But then I said to the judge, if this lady really believes he's the father, what would she have done?
Yeah.
Yes.
She would have gone to the lab and given a DNA. The fact that she's not going to the lab to give a DNA, and she's finding some rabbi to find an excuse not to do the DNA, what does that tell you?
She
That's
does.
not the baby. That's
That
not-
either he's not the father, or she doesn't know herself.
Yes.
And if she doesn't know herself,
That's a problem.
then for now, how much child support should this guy have to send her a month?
Zero.
Zero, and that's what the judge said. He says, right now, lady, no DNA, you know what you get a month?
Zero.
Zero. And life goes on. So it was an interesting Friday in my home. It was an interesting Friday. Listen to what it says further. It says that when Avram cried on Sarah, it has a small letter chaf. So Rashi says he cried very little.
Why?
Why? It was his wife. Why did he cry so little? So that's a different. The simple answer is too simple.
Maybe it was Shabbos.
No, the Baal HaTurim says that she had a full life. He didn't cry a lot because he realized she lived a long life, she had a good life, she had a full life, so there was no tragedy. But he brings down from a sefer called Rabbeinu Ephraim. One of my favorites for him, by the way, Rabbeinu Ephraim. Do you know why it's one of my favorites for him?
Your name.
Ah, there you go. I didn't write this one. It's Rabbeinu Ephraim. He says, remember something. Listen to what he says. Look how smart he is. He says Avram had a second wife, right? Hagar. When a person has a second wife, it's not good to cry too much for the first wife. That means he had two wives.
Yeah.
So when you have two wives, he says, you can't cry so much when your wife dies because your wife, your current wife, your second wife, is going to make her feel bad. So he didn't cry a lot, so not to make his wife feel bad. Then listen to this.
Ishmael's mother, right?
Ishmael's mother. Then listen to this. This is also very interesting. Again, from Rabbeinu Ephraim, he says that the Torah says Avram got up from her face, me'al pnei meso. So he brings down that the minhag in those days was when a relative died, before you buried them, you would give them a kiss to say goodbye. That's what he writes. Now today, if you wanted to give a relative a kiss, they won't even let you near the body because it's been washed and it's gone through the mikvah. There's a whole procedure, tachlichim. He says when Yaakov died, Yosef gave his father a kiss also. So he says in those days they used to give a kiss to the relative before they died,
So
before they
Christian
buried him.
got it from us.
They got it from the Sephardim do that, right?
No, Christian.
Christians do that. I don't know. So they got it from us. Now today, it's something very interesting. You should know this. Recently, when my father-in-law passed away, the family asked me to go to the back, and before the coffin was brought into the room, they should open the coffin to make sure that he was in the coffin. And I basically said, isn't there anybody else that can do this job? I didn't want to do the job. I mean, why do I want to go in and look at my father-in-law's face after he passed away? But it seems that there have been a lot of mix-ups lately. A lot of funeral homes have 2, 3, 4 people that are dying. They have funerals the same day, one at 11 o'clock, 12, and they mix them up. So it's becoming much more common now.
But when my mother passed away, at the last minute, when they finished to wash, they bring us inside.
Right.
And we saw her face.
Right.
We put sand.
Sand, dirt from Israel.
Around, and some kind pasukim, they said for us, and they put inside as they sent.
Okay, so you were there. Most Ashkenazim don't attend the Tara. Okay, that was unusual. Most Ashkenazim do not attend the Tara. So at this funeral, before the funeral begins, they're going to bring the coffin into the room.
Yes.
Because of all the mix-ups, now even amongst Ashkenazim, they ask, open it up. We want to make sure we have the right body. It's not to say goodbye. It's identification.
Make sure it's about the same.
Okay? Because they've had mix-ups. They've had situations where they buried a woman and it was supposed to be a man that died. They mixed it up.
Why?
So, it's very, very interesting. Now, let me tell you the next thing that's brought down from a sefer called, it's from Masechet Smochos. It's a Masechta in the back of Avodah Zorah. He says that in the olden days, when a person died, they didn't bury the person right away. I don't know if you know this. The Gemara in Baba Basra talks about it. They used to put people in caves. The Marat HaMachpelah was caves. He says, in those days, they had situations where people died, or they thought they were dead, and the next day, they woke up and they started walking around wondering why they were here. So it got so bad that they didn't bury people right away. They put them in a cave. And it says, they say here for 30 days, but the Torah says that's a mistake. It should be 3 days. They would go every day for the next 30 days to the cave and just to check to see if the body was still there. And they would listen to see if the person was talking. And he brings down a story that they went and buried someone, and when they came back the next day, the person was saying, help, help, what am I doing? Help, help, get me out of here. Because they had wrapped him up. And he was alive. So that's what that happened. Yes?
How they buried those days?
In those days, for the first year, they put him into a cave. And then after the year, they did what's called likut atzamot. They would gather the bones, and then they were buried in the ground. So the first year, they were put into a cave. That's all. They were just, like, if you go in Israel to the Sanhedria tombs, you'll see they're round type caves. That's all it is. They would lay them in a cave. They wouldn't bury them in the ground.
Wasn't it smell?
I'm sure, but it was in a cave, and and then afterwards they buried them in the ground. So there were different opinions what they did, but this was called Poktim ala Mesim. They would come to visit. They would come to visit the grave in order to see whether or not the person was really dead. And it was only after maybe 3 days or 30 days that they saw that the person was really dead that they began to bury the person. The next thing is interesting.
Could it be that some of them that they thought was dead, that the neshama came back into them?
They didn't know. In those days, they had no way of monitoring a person's death. If a person's heartbeat was very faint, they might say the person is dead, but the person really wasn't dead. There are even times now, hypothermia, where doctors think the person is dead, but the person is not dead. So if a person dies in the winter and is hypothermic, and they put him in a cave and he warms up, he might be alive.
Oh, lethargic sleep there also.
Yeah. Lethargic like 10 years. People can't sleep.
Right. So again, so they didn't know what to do. So the minhag was, the Gemara brings down, that they put them in caves. Some say for 3 days, some say for 30 days, some say for an complete year. And they would visit the cave just to see if the person was still dead. And after a year, they assumed the guy didn't come back. He was dead. We don't do that today. But I'm just telling you, it's interesting what happened, what the people did.
Do that?
What?
Why we don't do it?
Because we have machines. We can register brain waves. We can register heartbeats.
These are right away the
Okay.
brain. They
Когда
don't wait.
человек умирает, все равно мы даже в госпиталь отправляем, чтобы это констатировали врачи.
Okay, one or two more things I want you to listen carefully. There's a chidah. Fascinating chidah. The chidah says that after Moshe Rabbeinu died and Tzipporah died, the Malachim came and buried them in the Morat HaMachpelah. Now, everybody says, what are you talking about? Moshe never came into Israel. Moshe was never in Israel. He prayed. So the Chidah says that the words Marat Sedei HaMachpelah, the first letter spell Moshe. So he says there's an opinion. And people disagree with this opinion, but there's an opinion that Moshe was buried in the Morat HaMachpelah, but we don't agree with that. The last thing he says in here was that Edom, Esau, why was Esau called red, Edom? Because he looked red.
Yeah.
He says Lavan, his name wasn't Lavan, but he was white. He was an albino. You know, there are some people
Yeah.
that are born, they are very light, they're very white.
Yeah. No blood on them.
No blood. So he was called Lavan because he was born an albino. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I wasn't there. Okay, listen carefully. Avram says to Eliezer, I want you to go get a wife for me, go back to my family. Now, we know that Eliezer had an ulterior motive. Eliezer had a daughter,
Daughter, yeah.
and he wanted his daughter to marry Yitzchak. Avram said, no, my son is blessed, you're not blessed, you know, they're not a shidduch. Okay. Then Eliezer says to Avram, what happens if I find the girl, but the girl doesn't want to leave? You know, not everybody's going to come from their home and come all the way here. They may not want to leave. So Avram says, if she doesn't want to come, you're free. You don't have to schlep her. Don't take my son back. But don't be afraid, he says. Hashem, who guided me, who guarded me, who took me up this far, Yishlach malacho lefanecha. God will send his angel, and he'll help you. Okay. Last week when we did the Parasha, did you see his angel anywhere?
No.
Did you see his angel?
No.
You did. You just didn't realize it. Tonight I'm going to show you where the angel is. Okay?
Yeah, Eliezer went and he has angel.
Well, where? What did the angel do to help him?
To find out.
You're going to find out in about 5 minutes.
To find out.
Hold that thought. Okay. Anyway, Eliezer travels. They say he made it in one day. Kfitzat haderech. He's there right before his nighttime. And he says to Hashem, listen, Hashem, I'll make you a deal. The girl who offers me to drink, my camels to drink, that's the girl for Yitzchak. It wasn't the right way to ask the question, but Hashem answered in the right way. Rivka comes. Now look what it says. It's interesting to look at the psukim. I'm going to read to you very quickly. Posuk Yud Zayin. It says that she offered him to drink, v'temaher. It says that when Eliezer saw Rivka, vayora to'ever lekrasa, he ran. He didn't just walk, he ran. Then Rivka quickly took the pitcher, and then she quickly, v'torot, she ran back to the well, and she ran back. And then he ran again to her. And then she ran home. Every pasuk says, and she ran and she ran and she ran. V'toratz hanor, she ran to her mother's house. And Rivka had a brother named Lavan. Vayoratz Lavan, and Lavan is running. Why is everybody running? Every single pasuk is talking about everything is being done quickly, quickly, quickly. So the Bryks Rav gives a beautiful answer. He says that Eliezer said to Hashem, I'm going to give you just today to make the wish. Otherwise, I'm going to put my daughter in. So he came, it was 20 minutes before sunset. So Eliezer says, you have 20 minutes. If the right girl comes, I got you. It's your plan. But in 20 minutes, when the sun sets, I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to tell my Avraham, nobody was there, nobody wanted to come, my daughter is taking over. So Hashem made everybody running. Everybody was in a hurry. Why? Because they had no time. Now look what happens. Lavan is running. Now we know why Lavan is running, normally because of the money. But it says that Lavan is running, but when he saw the jewelry on Rivka, it says, Vayovo, he walked slowly now to Eliezer. 2 minutes ago he was running, now he's walking. What happened? Listen to what the Meshech Chochmah says. Earlier it says that Avram was old, Hashem berach es Avraham bakol. Hashem gave Avraham everything.
Yeah.
What does the Gemara say Bakol is? His daughter. He had a daughter named Bakol. So listen to what the Meshech Chochmah says. Lavan hears that Eliezer is here looking for a shidduch. Who does he think? For his daughter. Because normally you don't look for shidduchim for the man, you look for the girl. So he figures he's looking for a husband for Bakol. I'm his guy. I'm the guy. So he starts running. When he gets closer, what does he see? Rivka's getting all the presents. So he realizes, hey, idiot, it's not for me, it's for Yitzchak. He's not interested in me. Now he walks.
He calmed down.
Now he calms down. Now he's no longer running. There's no hurry anymore. Now he's not interested anymore. Now he's walking because it's not about me. You know, it has to do with Yitzchak and Rivka. It has nothing to do with me. Now, let's go a little bit further. Why does Eliezer think his daughter is a candidate? Avram already said no. So look what happens. When he comes, Lavan says to him, Vayomer, Bo Baruch Hashem, come, you blessed one. So Eliezer says, yesterday I was cursed. Today,
I'm blessed.
I'm blessed. Must be, I'm a candidate. So now Eliezer starts thinking, maybe my daughter is a candidate. So what does he do? Very strange. When he comes to the family, he doesn't talk about Yitzchak at all. He doesn't say, I have a great husband for your daughter. He's a tzaddik, he's this, he's that. He says, listen, I have, my master has a son. But I told my master, there's a good chance the girl doesn't want to come. When you go to a family and you want the girl to be interested in the boy, and you start saying, and there's a very good chance you're not going to want to come, is that the best way to approach the problem? No. If I have a car to sell you, and I say, listen, I have a car to sell you, you probably wouldn't want to buy it. You know, a car like this you don't want to buy. What are the chances you're going to buy my car? You're not going to buy my car. So Eliezer was already sabotaging the whole deal. He was already making the whole deal go south. And we see they delayed and they delayed and they delayed, but it's the way he spoke. So the way he spoke tells you that he had an ulterior plan. If he had an ulterior plan, so what was it? He didn't want that Rivka should agree. Why? Because he had a daughter. If he had a daughter, that's what's going to happen. Okay. Whatever happened to that malach? Let's go figure that out. Let's go figure out whatever happened to that malach. So it says that Eliezer spoke, and then it says Besuel said to him, why don't you sit down? I have proof that they must have been Bukharin. Should I tell you what my proof is that they're Bukharin? Okay? Look what happened. Here it is, and
before they became Bukharin, they were Israeli.
That might have been the case. So it happens as follows. He comes to the house. It says, so the first thing, what is the first thing Besuel and the family does when Eliezer comes to the house? The first thing, Vayusam lefonav lecho. He put food down. He says, come on, have something to eat. What does Eliezer say? Vayomer lo ocha. I'm not going to eat anything until I tell you what I want to say. Okay, so he didn't eat. Good thing he didn't eat.
Yeah.
What was in that food?
Poison. Yeah.
Poison. Because we see later on, the mother answers and Lavan answers. And Rashi says, where was Besuel?
Angel.
So who killed him? Say it louder.
Angel killed him.
Which angel? Avram's angel. I told you, you're going to find out where the angel was. Avram said to Eliezer, don't be afraid. I know my family. They're going to try to kill you. Don't be afraid. My malach is going to protect you. So who was the malach? So it doesn't say his name. But it calls, all the time in the Parasha, it says Eved, Eved, Eved. A few times it uses the word Ish. There's only one malach who's called Ish. When Yosef was looking and he was lost, it says a man met him. And Rashi says, who was that Ish?
Malach.
Which malach? What's the name? Begins with letter Gimel.
Gabriel.
So the malach of Avraham was Gabriel. And when Eliezer came, Gabriel was there behind the scenes. And when Besuel tried to kill him, Vayosem comes from the word sam, poison. Besuel tried to poison him, and the Malach switched the plates. Besuel ate the poison, and Besuel died. So when Avram said to Eliezer, "My Malach will be there to protect you," the Malach was. He was the Malach that killed Besuel. And that was the Malach that was there to protect Avram. And it's 9:30. No one fell asleep. I'm very happy for you. Have a
Was it
wonderful night.
Malach, not Gabriel one, eh? Gabriel,
It was Gabriel that was the Malach
same
that,
as the Yosef.
by Yosef also, was the Malach that affected. Have a good night, everybody.